Twin rows versus single rows. It's an experiment you're going to hear all about the results of in this episode of Cutting the Curve.
Welcome to Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve podcast, where we cut your learning curve with insights you can apply immediately to your farming operation. This episode is presented by Loveland products. When it comes to crop inputs, you need products that are field proven to deliver both results and value. For more than 50 years, Loveland Products has been providing farmers with high-performance, value-driven product solutions designed to maximize productivity on every acre. Visit lovelandproducts.com to see how their innovative products can help you farm more profitably. And now, here's your host, Damian Mason.
Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve. I got the Miles brothers. They're not really brothers, they're father and son. That's Matt and Layne Miles from McGee, Arkansas. And we're talking about twin rows versus single rows planted in furrow. This may be something that you're completely foreign to, like me, or it might be something you're actually doing. Either way, it's a trial, and the results of which you might learn something from. Probably about a month ago, got a message through the Extreme Ag text stream, and Matt was explaining the difference in yields he got from a twin row versus single row. How things are done in the Delta of Arkansas might be different on your farm, except that you might glean some information you can use. So you'd said, oh, Damian, we want to do an episode about this. Is only relevant to anybody that actually does flood irrigation and raised bed planting. And I said, I'm not sure about that. I think it's kind of an interesting concept. So anyway, a little bit about your farming practice and a little bit about the trial. You plant on raised beds. You irrigate. I call it flood irrigation. You call it something different. So go ahead, take us through that and then talk about the trial.
Yeah, so we plan on a 38-inch raised bed. So we furrow irrigate. So we lay poly pipe out, punch holes in it, and water from the top of the field to the bottom of the field. Those fields are land formed, with a grade on them. So, they're not rolling hills. Everything's basically flat. For us to irrigate, we have to have that, what people call precision level. So the reason why we're on 38 inches is cotton. Cotton is what our farm started on. Most of the farms in the Delta started as, the better ground was cotton ground. So the 38-inch width for a cotton plant was deemed to be the best, the closest basically you could get and still achieve maximum yield. Well, so by doing that, unless you have a separate set of tractors and equipment and planters and everything you need, we had to adapt that 38-inch row to our beans and corn. Before 2006, we didn't even grow any corn. So corn is relatively new in our area, when you look at the whole scheme of things. So, we were going out there with our cotton planter and planting single row beans so this is a trial. If you say this is a trial, we probably had these planters for 15 years. Mm-hmm. We started looking at how, because once we started getting into grain, just by our peers and different people we were talking to, the narrower the row, the higher the yield. So how do we get that narrower? That's hard to say.
More narrow.
How do you get that more narrow row and still keep it on that bed so you have the furrow to irrigate by?
Okay, so real quickly, by the way, Layne, you guys were cotton farmers until you were like 11 or 12 years old, and then were you even aware what was going on when this change happened?
So I was probably 2006. I would have been 12. Good math there, Damian.
Yeah, I'm capable. Yes. All right, I did that in my head. All right, so you're 12 years old. Did you even know what was going on when you went to school and they said, what in the hell is your dad doing? He's going to start trying to grow corn. They're supposed to do that up in the Midwest. Is that what happened?
I'm going to be honest with you, Damian. When I was 12 years old, I was forced to be on the farm. And at that point in time, like going to work was not, it was punishment. All my friends would be at the local swimming pool or playing on a field, whatever. And I was going to work. So, I didn't pay as much of attention then. So when I really started paying attention, I was probably 16. And at that point in time, it was normal practice.
Right. You didn't want to be a farmer when you were 12 years old?
No, I didn't want to be a farmer until I was 16, 17, 18 years old.
when I was 12 years old, when I was 12 years old, it was 1981. That was the absolute, like someone threw the gas on the fire of the farm crisis, and it was the absolute meltdown. So you talk about not wanting to be, I didn't even want to be in, I wanted to like live in you know, in a city and be away from it, because trust me, it was a bad time. All right, so 38 inches, that was because of cotton and then all the equipment. So I'm guessing that someone decided that's the way cotton should be produced. So then all the equipment became set up for that. And then you were making the switch. So once you made the switch, 38 inches is way too wide for corn. And so that's when you said, well, if we're going to be this far apart, let's stick 2 rows on top of this furrow. And again, to the person that's not from your part of the world, you can go on and see videos. There's some really cool video. In fact, there's a video of Layne walking down the line with this polypropylene tube that's filled with water and whacking it, and they whack it with a little punch that then the water spurts out. And I said, I want to do that job. And Matt told me, yeah, you'll like that job for about the first hour, and all of a sudden you get tendonitis in your elbow from going and whacking that thing.
The first million holes is pretty good. The last million holes is not too much fun.
All right. So anyway, so you got
Same with soybeans, because that plant at the time we didn't grow corn. So we started growing twin row soybeans, and there was several reasons for that. One, we were actually being able to spread that plant out some to get it. We were actually, if you take a twin row 38-inch planter, we're trying to mimic a 30-inch row, but we're getting about 32 inches. So, we were going where the big boys were going, or getting a lot closer, and still being able to do what we have to do to irrigate. So it started with the soybeans, and we've got, pigweeds got really bad. Palmer amaranth got really bad resistance to that. So one of the key things we've got to do in any crop is canopy closure as quick as possible. Well, if you spread that plant out, then you get canopy closure quicker. If you drill beans, you're going to get canopy closure in 10 days, 2 weeks, where if you got a single row bean, it may not ever get canopy closure. So we needed that shading effect to reduce the weeds. Then we've seen that it was starting to increase yield because we were getting that plant closer together. So when we started planting corn, I said, okay, if that works on soybeans, it ought to work on corn. So the first year I planted corn, I went out there with my twin rows, and at that point in time, I actually had 20-foot twin rows, 2 6-rows, because I didn't have a lot of grain at that point. It was mostly cotton. And planted it, it was no yield difference. I'm like, what's going on here? Well, the more I learned to grow corn, the more I realized that you had to have even spacing and even depth. That's the Bible on corn right off the bat, is everything needs to come up at the same time or you decrease yield. Well, when you're sitting on that bed with a piece of equipment, that equipment's going to move as you're going down the field.
right.
So if you're widening that out and you move over 4 inches, then
Now you're down. Now you're on the side of the mound. By the way, how big, for the person listening that's just driving down the road or in their tractor, they can't visualize what we're talking about. The top of those beds, since we call it raised bed planting, the purpose is because then the water goes down the valleys of these fields. How big is the bed? Is it a foot tall? It's about a foot tall, right?
It's about 6 inches tall and about a foot wide. It's
Okay.
where we're at that point. Okay. So we kept trying the twin row on the corn, and we weren't getting any extra yield. We weren't losing any yield. We weren't getting any extra yield. The more educated, I'm not going to say smarter because I'm still a dumbass, but the more educated I got with corn, the more I figured out that when we were getting on the side of that bed, we were actually changing the depth. And so that was any increase in yield we were gaining, we were losing in planting.
Mhm.
On the planter moving around. We were able to find a tillage tool, a bed preparation tool that actually gave us about a 18-inch top.
Okay, so wait a minute. If you're mashing it down, does that mean it becomes? If you're mashing down the top of the bed, Layne needs to comment on this. If I mash down the top of that bed that used to be a foot wide, now it becomes 18 inches wide. Doesn't that make it smaller? Does that make it shorter? Does spread that dirt out?
Well, sort of, kind of, it can at times. That the tool we actually bought more or less just shapes a water bed. We're not mashing it down, as if that makes any sense at all. It's taking a, I guess you would say, a smaller plow and making a narrower furrow, but a wider bed.
Okay.
That makes sense.
But the same depth.
But same depth.
The bed's still the same height. It's just wider and it's a more narrow middle and a wider bed, same height.
Okay.
And so we were able to, at that point, we started being able to, so that planter would sit on the center of that bed. Well, immediately we picked up 10 bushel an acre, sometimes 25. You know, I did a 3-year study, it's been 2 years ago, so it'll be 5 years now, with a minimum of 10 bushel increase in yield. And it's not just the fact that we're narrowing that up. We're also giving those plants more room,
right,
to grow. So instead of on a single row 38, your seeds are about 5.5 inches apart.
Okay.
Right down. On a twin row 38, they're 9.5, and then 7 in between them. So you're giving that plant more room to grow, to flex, to do everything it needs to do.
So what you just said is 9.5-inch spacing from one to the next, and then on top of that bed, there are 2 rows on top of that raised bed, and they're 7 inches apart.
Right, 7.5.
Think of it like a triangle. So if you've got a plant at the top,
yep,
on the left hand side, there one right below it's 9.5 inches, and then if you're staggering them like a triangle, so your next point's in between the 2 of them, but that's 7.5 inches over on the other side of the bed.
Got it. We're not gonna do too much geometry here, are we here, Layne? Like isosceles triangles, right angles, those kind of things, hypotenuse squares. Anyway, so what we got there is the spacing it gives enough room so that they can, thrive, but also you achieve canopy. So one thing you talked about, I want to go through it here. You said we achieve canopy, which helps with weed suppression for things like Palmer amaranth. That's obviously good. It takes 8 weeks, 6 weeks into the season, 8 weeks into the season before that's actually happens, though, right?
Oh yeah.
Right.
And you got to be quick on corn. You can't just go out there and say, well, I'm gonna spray it 10 days from now, because 10 days from now the canopy will start to close enough that you can't get through there.
Okay.
And your furrow clean with the wide row 38, we can plow. If our furrow gets messed up or filled in or whatever, we can plow a 38-inch row. You're not plowing a twin row 38.
When you say plow, you mean like cultivate between the rows?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. It's common practice here to be able to get the water down.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then the next thing, population. If you just did a single row, your population would be less than the twin row, but you are spacing them out more. So tell me about the population between single and twin.
You want me to go? Or you?
Layne, we haven't heard from Layne for a while. Do you know the population?
Yeah, so we were 34.5 on single row, and we're still 34.5 with the twin row. We haven't seen a lot of yield gain or yield loss really moving that a lot.
So population stays the same,
pretty much.
Hey, you guys were asking before we hit record how many people watch versus just listen to the audio. Most of our action happens on audio, but if you are listening to this and you wonder what am I missing by watching, Layne is wearing a Chestnut Manor Farms t-shirt, which is I think in size small or maybe extra small, because he looks really buff. He's showing that he's been working out, but he's wearing a very small Chestnut Manor Farms t-shirt. So if you're just listening and you want to watch, you should watch so you can see the beef master over here. All right, so 34,500 is population regardless. So you're not spending any more on seed. You get 10 bushel more yield on twin row. Why would somebody not do twin row if they're going to do what you're doing? They don't have the equipment. Is the equipment expense?
Well, yeah, so a lot of people are going to use the same planter. One planter. They can take that one single row planter and do a lot of things with it.
Yep.
With twin row, and that's where we were. We were taking the twin row and just planting soybeans with it. So we needed to really be able to justify, that $200,000 planter on more than just soybeans, and that we just kind of evolved into that. There's a lot of people going to twin row, but there's some that just, you know, they just won't do it. My cousin come and harvested for us, and we actually, because of time. So I'd rather have a single row and plant it on time than wait on a twin row and be out of time. Then you really negate yield. I mean, it don't make any difference. My cousin came out 3 years ago and harvested for us, and we were running 2 twin rows and a single row in the same field. And he said, he called me, he said, every time I get in the twin row, it's 10 bushel better. And he converted completely over, but a lot of people just don't want to do that conversion. It's a lot more trouble. A perfect example is you can't just go out there and plant on a loblolly looking bed if you're, because of the fact the planter moves. So you've got to
Wait, Layne, you got to be my interpreter here. What the hell did you call it? A loblolly? A loblolly bed? What do you call it? Lollipop bed? What do you say?
Loblolly looking
a
bed.
loblolly looking bed, a raggedy looking, junky looking, like a tire with knots on it.
Okay, so the beds have to be, but you do that every year anyhow, don't you? Don't you go through with a machine behind the tractor that shapes and sculpts the beds?
We do, and a lot of people do, and a lot of people don't. A lot of people try to get by the cheap way. They'll plant the single row corn, then they'll come back and plow it.
It's a lot like, I'm not trying to cut you off, but just for visuals, it's a lot like Chad running his strip freshener. So he does his he runs his strip till, and then he'll come in and run his strip freshener to kind of smooth it up and get it ready to be able to plant.
It's a little extra work. So it depends on if you want to make, you know, $50 to $75 more an acre and spend 10 to do that on field work, or if you just want to not spend the 10 on field work and make, you know, 50 or 75 less. I mean, that's kind of a smart aleck way to look at it, but it takes work to make that bed preparation to use that twin row.
Yeah. Well, I like making money, and so do you. So, all right. So the just from the standpoint, okay, we know that the trial is such that it's always made you 10 bushels more. Are there other inputs? The seed stays the same. The bed has to be refreshed, prepped properly, which probably should be whether it's single or twin rows. Is there any other added expense? You're not putting out any more input cost. You don't have any more plants, so you're not putting out more fertility, are you?
No, everything's the same. It might be a little bit cheaper because a lot of times you won't have to make that third herbicide pass.
Because of the canopy.
So we trade that extra tillage trip to get the bed right for a herbicide cost that we don't use.
So it gives you a bit more canopy effect, which is interesting just because of the spacing, right, Layne? You get more canopy early because of the way the triangulation of the plants is.
It's a lot faster.
Yeah. So then does that save you? Is that less water? Because if you got shade, it doesn't evaporate as fast. Can you cut back on water?
It's not noticeable.
Oh,
I would say there's one disadvantage, and if we could ever figure this out, there's no telling where this yield's going to go. It traps more heat because that's a denser canopy. So down here, as much heat as we get already, that's a negative, and we're still getting a positive return. If we could ever figure out how to get that heat out of there, it would be that much better. So when you do it on a narrow row, single row, you get more wind through the canopy than what we get. You know, if you look at a heat map, everywhere we're twin row is going to be hotter than where we're single row.
yeah, got it. All right. So the planting is, you said, you set up one year you did 2 planters that were twin row, one that was a single row. Is it a new unit, or is it just reconfiguring an existing unit to do the twin row?
No, it's a complete new unit. We actually tested a triple row last year, to see how far can we go. But no, it's a complete separate planter. You can't take a regular planter. You'd have to completely strip it down and start over. If you're going to do twin row, you need to buy one. But if a guy wants to try it in your area, with the GPS as good as it is today, he could actually plant a half a rate of seed on a pass.
Yep.
And shift track over 7 or 8 inches and plant another half a rate of seed and get the same effect just to try it.
Okay, so that's the next question. So where we are, we don't do I call it flood irrigation. Remind me, Layne, what do we call it down there?
Furrow irrigation.
Furrow irrigation. I call it flood irrigation. All right. we don't do that here. We don't have raised beds. Am I missing out? Could somebody in Indiana or Nebraska or whatever, could somebody go through and do a twin row, you said 7 inches apart, 7.5 inches apart, and get the kind of results you're getting?
I almost don't think so, because we're just trying to get where they are at 30.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just kind of trying to mutate ourselves into a 30-inch row. They're already 30. Now, a cool trial would be to take a 30-inch planter. So at Ag PhD, we did our, we had those competition plots there, and we would actually twin row our soybeans on 30 inches. So, they would go in there and shift track that planter over and plant it right beside, like what I'm talking about doing on flat ground. I would like to see the data if you could take a 30-inch row and go 7 inches apart, because 20-inch rows have maybe been deemed to be one of the highest yields. Kevin and a lot of those guys are on 20-inch rows. Again, that's a lot of trouble, and that's why a lot of farmers don't want to do it, because it's extra work.
Yep.
But if it makes more yield, but I wonder sometimes if you could take a 30-inch row and twin row that and make a difference. We made over 100 bushel beans in South Dakota at the Ag PhD plot, and it was twin row.
Combine setup change?
Nope, stays the same. Now, it's probably 95% as efficient. There's times when
You think you're knocking over ears, knocking over stalks?
we don't see it if we do. I mean, when I say it's 95% efficient, the driver has to pay more attention. All those rows are going in a regular 38-inch corn head, just like a single row would. It's not as easy. I mean, again, there's a little bit of trouble to it, but we never have any trouble to knocking them over.
All right, we talked about corn a lot on 10 bushels. Layne, you can answer this. Soybeans, is it the same? I mean, you started doing this because of the soybeans, right?
That's right. It's definitely it's the same or more in our opinion, depending on the type of ground. So we can get on some of our sandier ground, and a single row will yield roughly with it. I mean, maybe a bushel or two, but you do the math on a bushel or two, you can make a pretty decent payment on a planter too. Most of the twin row shines in heavier ground because it doesn't get as tall, it canopies faster and stuff like that. But it's all around it's better. I mean, not just in yield, but in canopy closure. And then you still got the opportunity to make an extra bushel or two on sandier ground.
I always forget when your old man says his good ground is Chad's bad ground, and Chad's best ground is not Kelly's ground. I always forget which one is the one that's the good stuff. Is it the sand or the gumbo, or you guys have all kinds of names for it down there? Which one's the stuff that's good?
Ours is the sand, which Chad calls his bad ground.
All right. You missed it. Farm Progress show. I had Mike Evans and Chad on the panel, and Evans looked at soil results from my property, and he said, "Your ground is so bad, it reminds me of Chad Henderson." So Chad and I are still debating who's offended by that. Should Chad be offended that he said it about me, or should I be offended he compared my stuff to Alabama? I'm still not sure.
Evans can be discredited because, I mean, he can just look at a soil sample on their place like, oh man, that's the best ground in the world. So he can be a little discredited.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. All right, so wrap us up on this. You got the trials going. It's really not even a trial at this point. Is there any reason not to do twin rows in your situation?
I don't see a reason. No,
I mean, if
you don't have the planting equipment, be the only one, and there's an expense to the planting equipment.
But the ROI will pay for the planter in minimal amount of years. I mean, it'll double what the planter payment is, depending on how many acres you have.
Right.
But you can get a cheaper twin row if you got smaller acres, you just get a cheaper planter. But I can't see any reason why a guy wouldn't be twin row on all his corn and beans. Now, I will say this. You have to water every middle. So if you have water restrictions, you got weak wells, and you can't water every other middle, then you need to plant single row.
We have some fields like that.
Yeah, we have some.
Water every other middle. Layne, what are you talking about?
Every other furrow. So when we irrigate, say twin row, each furrow's got water running down it.
Yep.
Here in single row, which is more of what we do on our cotton, we water every other furrow.
So when I'm walking down there with my little punch and whacking the thing, I only have to do every other row if it's cotton.
Yeah.
Or single row corn.
Yep. Right. Or single row beans. Got it. All right. So twin row on soybeans, twin row on corn. Is there any other crop? Rice is a different beast, and then cotton's your other thing, and cotton has to stay single. Would you benefit by somehow putting this method to cotton?
No, it's been tried, and I mean the picking scenario in general it just won't work.
Doesn't work. Got it. All right, get me out of here, Layne. We're talking about twin row versus single row, and this is, I think, interesting to anybody, even if they're in Ohio, because they're not going to do it. But I think it's interesting to hear about this practice and what you've learned. And how many years now have you been doing this?
Since 2006. We've been doing twin row probably consistently since what, 2000?
Yeah, right. Twin row soybeans we've been doing since 2000.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. So long enough time to have a body of work to compare the results to, and it seems like it's not even a question. All right, get me out of here. What else? What did I ask you, burly man?
I don't know.
That Joe Weider powder, like that powder, like the meatheads do when they're in the gym, where they dump the powder in the water and drink the protein. Do a lot of grunting when they're in the gym. Do you do that?
No, I don't. Here lately, the gym's kind of been obsolete for me.
Yeah, right. You've been busy harvesting. All right. His name's Layne Miles. He's sitting next to Matt Miles, talking about raised bed stuff with twin row versus single row. I think it's an interesting topic. And also, whether you're doing it on your farm or not, it's always interesting to hear how other people are doing stuff. And maybe you can glean some information you can apply to your farm. Speaking of information you can apply to your farm, hundreds of episodes of Cutting the Curve, hundreds of videos that I've produced or the guys have produced in the field at events that can help you with your farming game. Think about it. There's all kinds of stuff. We're talking about equipment. We're talking about agronomics, chemistry, inputs, even the business side of farming. It's all there. Extremeag.farm. Go to Extremeag, no E on the front of Extremeag.farm, and share this. It's all free. It's all there. And it's all to help you increase your ROI on your farming operation. Until next time, thanks for being here. Thanks, guys. Until next time, I'm David Mason with Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve.
That's a wrap for this episode of Extreme Ag's Cutting the Curve. But there is plenty more available by visiting extremeag.farm. For over 50 years, farmers have turned to the proven lineup of crop inputs offered by Loveland products. From seed treatments, plant nutrition, adjuvant, and crop protection products, Loveland has the complete lineup to keep your farming operation productive and, most importantly, profitable. Check out lovelandproducts.com to learn more.